You are listening to the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast, episode 148, talking about the Critical Role in the room. In today's episode, we discuss the popular show Critical Role. We discuss how the live play helps the hobby and game popularity. We also discuss how the show can detrimentally affect GMs and players as well. If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and joining me once again, I've got Josh. Josh, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How you doing, Aaron?
Doing great. I'm doing great. I hope you got all your cues written down on a good sheet of paper here to get the show rolling. We're having a little fun conversation before.
Get the script ready, making sure it's all in place. We've got all of our planned jokes out and written.
That's right. We've returned to the AI. We've let it write our new episode here that we're going to be talking.
That's right, Aaron.
No. We're not going to do that again. No serious script. Josh does do a really good job with the notes, though. I need to give him a shout out every time that we go through this because this show used to be really off the cuff. It still is. I'm more or less the wild card now, but Josh definitely has more of a production value to the whole podcast itself.
Yeah, I remember when you first interviewed me for this, and we were talking about how my DM style really is write a whole bunch of notes and then just make it up. So, I do have like pages of notes and points. We follow it sometimes. It's there in case I forget what we're actually talking about.
Helps bring us back to the to the topic at hand. And that topic today is we talk about the critical role in the room.
Yeah, which I think talking about faking a script kind of fits in with that.
And the production value that goes into to what is a live play role playing game, and these have become really popular. I mean, obviously, Critical Role being the kind of the king of them all. Like, I think that's the one that everybody sort of knows. It's got an adaptation to one of their stories on Amazon Prime. I mean, like, they've got tons of
with another one coming out. They've announced that they're making their
other campaign too on Amazon Prime, aren't they? So they are taking what they have been doing for years and now really parlaying it into this kind of mega empire thing that they sort of have.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to first sort of like talk about what is a live play. I know that most of our listeners understand that there are people who play role-playing games and record it either for Twitch or for a podcast format. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a very predominant one. Critical Role has really taken the steam and moved the whole genre forward. It's created a lot of imitators, people that are also playing their games, or people that are taking their home games, thrown up some bed sheets behind them and recorded it for Twitch. And to some degree, that's really been helpful for getting people involved in the whole format. But Critical Role itself is a highly produced piece of work, and you need to pay attention to that. And I think that's good for us to talk about that.
Yes, and it is. There's a ton of production value associated with the show itself. I mean, when we go into really what's real in the live play versus not real, all that sort of stuff, we'll dive into that. But you everybody who's on the Critical Role team are professional voice actors. They have tons of credits in IMDb. They they are actors. It's essentially what they are. So when they sit down and they get into character, you're like, how do they do that? It's like, well, that's their job.
Yeah.
like
Well, and the DM for that show, Matt Mercer, is considered by many to be like the king's DM. He just is really good at what he does, and the style of story that he produces, he creates for his players, um, is a really well designed piece of work. The only other live play that I think really captures that level of production and that level of value between the players and the DM. There's nothing wrong with a lot of the other ones. There's some really good ones out there, but I'm talking about like just in terms of production value would be Dimension 20. Dimension 20 is like a paid subscription to get into. It's got a lot of other humorous content, college humor stuff, but you get there's a couple of different DMs that have gone through there. I think even Matt Mercer might be doing one this coming March or May. But Brandon Lee Mulligan is a DM that goes on there as well. And I love watching his stuff because the guy has like serious golden retriever energy, but he's obviously like well versed in
well versed in acting, well versed in the English language, well versed. What, Josh?
Oh, my brain just went completely blank.
He's well versed. Okay,
he is. He just is. No, and he can come up with things on the fly, off the cuff, that are amazing pieces of literature of just spoken word, and that works really well for any sort of tabletop game.
Yes.
There's been a couple other DMs that have gone through, and I posted a link in my notes about there's apparently another live play that they're trying to bring up with Brandon Lee Mulligan and Abria Iyengar, who was on one of the Critical Role shows, Lou Wilson, who was on that as well, Erica Ishii, who was on it as well. And so, like, there's a lot of people that are trying to get that same sort of fire that Critical Role has.
Yeah, I mean, like it is a space. This is the thing: is when you see something that is successful, you get copycats because it's successful. And so, I mean, I'm not saying that Dimension 20 is necessarily a copycat for Critical Role or anything like that, but it is trying to fit into that space and that genre, and clearly there's an appetite for it. So the more people who do it, the better there is. Friends of this podcast, the Dungeon Masters Dojo, they have their own live play. They had an Acorn's Journey. There's D20 to Curtain, a Fool's Quest. These are all people that we actually did a collaborative live play last October. That was The Devil Went Down to Jersey. And they all do their own live plays as well. So if you haven't listened to some smaller ones, those are some great podcasts to go listen to get another live play feel and get a different, I guess, a juxtaposition to Critical Role and like a super heavily produced show that's being broadcast on Twitch to more something that it's still produced, but it's being it's being done on a podcast platform. It's maybe a little less serious than what they do on like the Critical Role there. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from those live plays. They're all very good, but it's just, it's a different thing. So, you might feel more of a connection with the live play itself.
Yeah. Well, and I was looking out for other live plays and taking a look at different podcasts for different games as well. And there's some that do, there's New Game Who Dis, which does different games for each time they run a new story, different game systems, which I think is an excellent and fun way to do things. There's a couple of different ones that do, cyberpunk stories or Shadowrun stories. There is LA by Night, which does Vampire the Masquerade as both a podcast, and I think they were doing like a TikTok thing for a while. I don't know. Um, and so there's some really great ones out there for things that are not D&D, uh, and ones that are more focused on maybe the stories that you like to hear. And there's just a lot that you can go for at this point. But I think it's important to talk about the big ones because sometimes you'll get new players, new people that are joining the hobby because they are introduced to things like The Legend of Vox Machina on Amazon Prime, or that new Chris Pine movie that's coming out at the end of the month or next month. I don't know. It's coming out sometime soon.
Yeah, no, I mean, like you're right. It's important to talk about the big ones in the room, especially because like people watch Critical Role, and then there's this whole thing about the Matt Mercer effect, and we can go talk about that later on in the podcast here. But I mean, it is true. Like I mean, it's great that they present a level of popularity to the hobby, and that they're able to reach such a wide audience. But at the same time, to new players and to other players alike, or even players in general who maybe have aspirations to try GMing, it can feel like it's such an overwhelming, daunting task because you see somebody else do it in a way or a style, and then like I always had this with our GM on at the table, which is like you'd see our GM do their thing, Jared does his thing at the table, and you go, well, I can't do that. Like I can never figure it out. And it's the real thing is, as I've tried to reiterate through every episode in this podcast, is it's about practice. You probably can't do it that way the first time you do it. The second time you do it, the third time, the fourth or fifth time, you'll start getting the flow of it. You'll be able to see what you need to kind of put together to do a story, and how to improvise when you need to improvise and all those things. But to see it from a Critical Role aspect and try and replicate that it's very, very hard, and we'll get into that later on. But let's talk about how real this live play genre really is.
Well, and I think there are some things that Critical Role does really well for sticking with like what is a real game. And by all accounts, it did start as a home game. Now, it did not start as a D&D game. It started as a Pathfinder game, and they decided to move to D&D when they went streaming because they thought that it would be easier for people to digest. And they're absolutely right. But it did cause some problems with their first campaign. And I think some of the good things that they did that really still feel like it's a game between friends is that there is still, that dumb humor. They've got rolling jokes, in jokes. And that is something that we're all going to see in our games. We're going to see with our friends, and they're going to cross over between campaigns, different stories, even different DMs. You're going to keep, if it's the same people, you're going to keep that same dumb humor. One thing that I do think is still pretty good and is good for viewers, people that don't know the hobby. They do stick to a lot of the rules. You have a lot of that, the story, the way that the game is designed, it is following the rules from the book. They do have skill checks. They do pretty elaborate fights, which are mostly, I'd say, like 90% accurate. There are sometimes flubs happen, which actually is kind of, real too. If you're DMing, you're not going to get everything right all the time. And it's a lot easier to watch somebody make a mistake and point it out afterward, point it out because you're not in it. So I think that a lot of those things are really good, and it's good to watch.
Yeah, I agree with all that. There's definitely you again, it's a good way to see how the hobby is performed. Like if you want to like sit down and watch a group of players play the game, rules as written for the most part, that's a great way to kind of do that. I think what comes into is what isn't real, and as I said, it's a highly produced show. So obviously, because they're all actors, the role play between the players and the GM, and like nobody really breaks character is like that's something that you might not be able to expect at your table. And really that's where like when I say it's not real is you might have somebody who wants to be really in character when they're at table and they only talk in character or whatnot. But most I've never met a group to this point in time where people were so serious that like you never broke character. Okay, when I was doing the live play recording for Double Went Down to Jersey, that was like trying to stay in character because we were doing the production there, and trying to interact with people within character and not ask too many questions, I guess, outside of character, unless it was for a clarification of the scene itself, and not try to make silly quips and make the table laugh and all that other fun stuff that you would do when you're hanging out with friends. But trying to be good for the production of the live play itself. I mean, what's not real. You've got this highlighted here. The GM's job is to make this story. What do you mean?
Well, like that's Matt Mercer's job. Like he spends all day, every day, working on this story. He's got a production team to help him make sure that everything's right. His wife, Marisha Ray, she runs the production there. They built a set that allows him to have lighting effects and backgrounds and music. And this is all like an immense amount of production value, but also the story itself, the sets, the minis. That's what he does for a living.
Yes, he gets paid to do that.
I have a job. I've got to do my job. So
you don't do your job and kids don't eat. You can't be like, sorry kids, I was trying to create an adventure the other day.
Here, have some D20s. We're going to eat these for dinner. I have too many of them.
Delicious and nutritious.
It is the GM's job in these high production ones to make a story. And some people, they can come up with really powerful stories, really great and moving emotional stories, and live play and all this sort of improv on the spot, off the cuff story. And that's great. But not everybody can. Some people, I need to have notes. I need to have a plan. I may not follow it. I may go off on the rails. But yeah, that's his job. So when you look at, yes, you've got people that are, doing role play. And I wrote this as a note above and we sort of skipped over because I wasn't paying attention. I like to think of the people, and I read this somewhere and I don't remember where it was. So I seriously forgive me for not remembering where this came from. They called the sort of role playing that was going on Critical Role pure theater kid energy. Just bouncing around, doing nothing but coming up with scenes. It's great. It's wonderful. It reminds me of, being a kid on the playground and just playing make-believe, but that's all within the same story. And having a GM there that, is actually like pushing it into this pre-built story that they've sort of curated is really impressive, but it's not something that we all can do.
Yes, it is. And the other thing too that's not really real is that the mystery and the puzzles are sort of they're not very deep. When I say make them 2 steps stupider, they're probably like make them like 4 steps stupider. Okay, like they can't be so so difficult for the actors to solve that the actors would stall and not be able to continue the scene.
Yeah, I don't remember a time when like they I know in game they've gotten stuck by things like doors. And it's because the door is locked and they just all rolled like crap. And then they figured out a way past it anyway. Um, but as for like solving a puzzle or solving a mystery, they've called them mysteries, they've called them puzzles, but the story was heading towards the solution anyway. And if nobody had said something, they still would have gotten to the place where they needed to be because that's the point. It's
it's a show. You need to advance the plot regardless of whether or not your players can figure it out.
So I'm not saying that they are, they're not feeding the players the information that's necessary and just like ignoring the fact that there's a puzzle. I'm saying that there wasn't a puzzle to begin with. It gave the illusion of a puzzle, and it was always going to go in a specific direction.
It looked like a puzzle, it walked like a puzzle, it talked like a puzzle, but it wasn't a puzzle.
and that's the same thing with mysteries. Is that you had in the last campaign there was a great scene near the end where one of the characters was like doing the full-on conspiracy red string at a corkboard, crazy, trying to tie all the loose ends together and make sense of everything. I don't think it was necessary. It didn't change how they were going to be proceeding. They may have spent more time prepping for a fight, but it still was going to happen. They weren't going to like come across something and not understand why it was there. It was a lot of that is for the viewer's enjoyment rather than getting the players on the same page. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, no, again, so I mean, you just have to keep that in mind. What they're doing that is like actually playing. It's not that they're not actually playing. It's just that they are, because it's produced. There's a heavy onus to make sure that you are not stalling out your story. And mm-hmm. If I put a camera on 100 different tables and watched you role play, I guarantee you. And any GM who's listening to this goes, my players spend hours accomplishing nothing. Okay. and it's true, but you can't have that in a live play, which is why, that's the not real part of it. The real part of it is that your players will spend hours accomplishing nothing. Okay.
Yeah, they will feel like it too. They will absolutely feel like it. And I think that's a really great place to start talking about what is the good and the bad. How does this affect people who watch these live plays, both GMs and players? And I think we've talked about this already in this podcast. I think it's really good because people get to learn a new system.
Yes.
If you aren't familiar with a system and they're showing it, yeah, the roles are there, the skills are there, the fights are there. That's great. It's wonderful for that. I've picked out a couple of different podcasts, specifically when I want to learn how a game is run, but I don't stick with one podcast for a game. You can't. That's, everybody runs their game a little differently. So it's probably a good idea to try a couple of them just to see, what styles you like and what are the differences between things. And the same thing with this.
Yeah. I mean, again, it brings the one of the really big things that this does is it brings popularity to the hobby overall. And it makes it easier to find people who play. Because, I mean, if you think about it, if I go back to when I started role playing, the hobby was stigmatized, okay? And now that you have more people, more prevalent, popular actors and actresses playing D&D, you now have this sort of like gateway into like, okay, it's not just for, those creepy basement dwellers over there. Like it is for, like anybody can play the game. And I think that gives it that that's a major like a major help to the hobby itself and just the popularity of the hobby overall.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's our popularity is giving us more options for games because there is a revival in the genre. Tabletop RPGs, you're getting more of them all the time. New ones popping up. There's been a lot of these like one-page RPGs. I've talked about it before on the podcast. They're a lot of fun, and they're just stupid, dumb games that you get to play and just like throw together something of just for a night. Um, and it is bringing a lot more players to the genre as well. Players want to come in, they want to experience these hero moments, and they're willing to engage in a game to get that. And I think that's great as well. At the same point, they have to realize that hero moments are not going to just be falling in your lap. You do have to work for it. And maybe that's something we need to watch out for when we're, when new people are coming in who have experienced these live play sessions.
Yeah. I mean, again, it also gives you exposure to other ways that GMs tell stories, their ideas, things like that. You're getting to see how other GMs kind of practice their craft and how they handle different situations. And so one of the reasons why I would say follow the entire genre of live plays. Don't just look at Critical Role and Dimension 20, because those, if you've done the DMing thing for a while, they may feel almost so produced that they're fake to you. Okay. And that's why when I say like DMD, a Dungeon Master Dojo, D20 to Curtain, A Fool's Quest, other things like that, they may like they're probably more relatable in that regard, and they probably don't feel as fake. Good way to put it. But what's the bad side about this? And really the bad piece about I'd say the really, really big ones. And I think that is that your players, and this is my big bugaboo with them, is that players who see it, it can be disheartening for them because they expect a ton out of their GM, and their GM is like, you as a GM, or if you are aspiring to become a GM, you might look at this and go like, I can never do this. I really can never do this. Like, Matt Mercer is so good, or I'm going to try to just emulate that style of GMing. And the truth is
that's that man's job. Okay.
It's his job. He's great at improv. He's an actor. He is a master of the craft in that regard. He's done it because it's his job. So, he's done the 10,000 hours or whatever. You need to become a master. You might just be starting. It's great to see him do it to give you the inspiration to want to dive into the hobby. But that should be what you need to get you. It should be the leaping board to get you into the hobby. DM your story the way that you're going to DM. You're going to develop your own style. Okay. A tangent from this, my friend Nick says that every DM tells stories that are in some way interpersonally connected to the way that they grew up and the way that they who they are as a person. So you will tell stories in that regard as well. So things that you like, blah blah blah. But you will form your own style, and you can see tips and tricks that they do in the production there, but I would not ever suggest to try to emulate it in terms of like the voices and the mannerisms and the sound effects and it's so much to think about when you first start, or even if you've been doing it for a while, that it just seems so crazy to do it.
Yeah. Absolutely. It from the player's perspective, expecting that level of production value is insane. But I've also seen it the other way. I've seen people that they've watched Critical Role or one of these other live plays, and they think, hey, I can do that. I can tell a story.
That's the
I've
Matt
got a
Mercer
story
effect,
I
right?
want. And they come into this expecting the same level of role play, voice acting, and frankly, professionalism from players, which is not going to happen. I mean, a lot of us are coming into games because it's what we want to do to relax and unwind. I'm not here to be Shakespeare in the Park. I'm here to roll some clicky clacky dice and get the big numbers and make my happy time go yes, because I want to kill some goblins. And
That's what a lot of people you play with will just be like, I don't want to beat up some goblins or orcs today.
and there's nothing wrong with that. Solving a mystery, solving some puzzles, uh, defeating a dragon, saving a town or destroying it. All of these things are great, but I'm not going to keep up a voice for a whole game. I'm not going to, spend 30, 40 minutes role playing with a buddy about a time that his characters was a child, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's, if that is something that you want to do, if that's your type of game, everybody at the table has to be on that at the beginning.
Something
And
yeah,
that is
I was gonna bring this up because I had made a little note about a video from XP to level 3 about like what happens when your DM watches Critical Role, and then he comes in, he's trying to like do everything that it's a very funny video. He's trying to do everything that like Matt Mercer would do, and
he's even got the vest. I mean,
he's got the vest. He puts on like the fake wig. He's got it's.
I don't know if that's a wig. I think that might just be his hair. No, and I watched the video, and he's going way overboard with everything. But, and this is where I disagree a little bit on this, I don't think anything that he's doing is a problem in that video. I think he's going a little bit overboard. But if you set that sort of style of game, that heavy role playing with interactions between characters, a lot of flourishes, a lot of cinematics, whatever, if your players are into that, do it. That's all we've talked about with
know
KYP.
Your players. KYP, know your players. This is that you're right. If your players like it, if your players want it, do it. The little thing that you got at the end of it was like, dude, we liked the way you DM before. Like, you don't have to do any of this stuff.
And that also brings us to the other half of this that I was talking about. I put a note in here. Said if your players like that, that's great. But if only one person from the game is playing it that way, that's like the guy that shows up at the party and has a different energy than everybody there. It makes you uncomfortable. It doesn't fit. And fitting in with the group and coalescing to create a story together is what this is supposed to be about. So yeah, you gotta match the energy of the party. And if you don't, it's going to be a problem. If everybody's there, great. But if everybody isn't there, or everybody isn't planning on getting there, then you're just it's going to be a problem.
Yes.
So how do you counteract this sort of effect? And the first thing I'm going to say, you start with your prep work in your session 0. With your prep work, it's you go in, you talk to your players, find out what they're looking for in a game. If they're looking for this sort of experience, are you willing to provide it? If you're not, you have to explain to them that's not what this game is going to be. And you have to be on the same page when you start this thing. If they want to have, a more role play style with big hero moments and overcoming diversity and whatever, you need to make sure that you help them create characters that are not one dimensional. They need to have follies and foibles. They need to have quirks. They need to have dimension, depth, thickness of characters. And then you go into your session zero, and your session zero has to be an accurate representation of how the rest of the game is going to be played. And that means that you and the players got to be on the same page, because if you start changing things and the players aren't into it, if it's not agreed upon that this is going to make it better for everybody, it's going to cause issues.
Yeah, I don't think I've talked about this with you, Josh, but yeah, the session zero is so important for establishing expectations within a game and what you're going to be doing, and the style that you're going to be doing at the GM, the tone that you're going to be trying to lay out for your players. Again, if all your players like that style, want to do a heavy role play game, then that's where you establish it, is in the session zero. Don't show up, 3 sessions in with your weird bard hat and be like, all right.
Unless it's a bit. I mean, by all means,
yes,
come in and do a bit and then stop the bit. Don't go overboard when you are doing your session zero, because you're going to be setting expectations that you might not be able to keep up.
Yes. And then, keep ongoing things that you could do to counteract the effect, would be, pay attention to what your players are liking and learning from your sessions. Talk with them, get open feedback from your players every session or as the game progresses and goes on. So you can adjust the game accordingly to how your players want the tone to be. Like, maybe something's too serious. Maybe something from the session zero sounded really great, but it's not jiving now. Or maybe your players want more of something that they didn't get when you established in session zero. Ongoing is so important. I mean, maybe you have players who don't like their character at all. You have to change that stuff. So it's really important to have a good line of communication with your players. I talked about that a lot with Jared previously with the podcast, that it's so important to lean on your players after every session, after every game that you do, to be able to get feedback to your campaign, to what you're doing right now, and see how your players are liking it. Also, their tone and their excitement in communicating their thoughts with you is what's going to make it possible, or what's going to make it more enjoyable for you when you create the next scenes and stuff. And then something else that I added out of nowhere here was the other way to counteract this. Again, I've talked about this from like you being a new GM coming into this, is manage your game sizes and practice telling games. Start smaller. Don't build a long epic tale. You don't need to create the Legend of Vox Machina. Okay, you don't need to do that. It's unnecessary to put on a new GM. Okay, it's too daunting of a task. The likelihood that you are going to complete the story or finish telling the story is probably not. It's just probably, you're probably going to lose it somewhere in the middle of it, and it's worse to never end a game and have it just kind of fade into obscurity than to tell something compact that can be completed within 5-6 sessions and end the story. Okay, because at least then you have you practice, how do I intro it, how do I outro it, how do I do a session zero again, how do I do this? Like, it's practicing the bits that make you better at becoming a GM and make it more likely that you will succeed in a long-term story overall.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I did on my last game was that I set it up with chapters, and it was a longer story overall, but each chapter itself was sort of a self-contained part of it, where it had an intro, a middle, and an end. And if you want to go in and come up with a big, long fantasy, don't jump in to a big, long fantasy. You're going to have problems maintaining it or building. You spend 30 or 40 sessions building something up. Have these small mini arcs, and that'll get you more into that style. One of the things that I put note down on here, I know we had talked about, listening to your players and getting feedback, what they like. But I think it's also very important as a GM to give your players that same sort of feedback. Tell them what you like about their playing, about what they have done well. Positive communication from you to your players is going to reward you with better players.
Nah, I was keeping guessing. Uh,
Well, then.
How can you use the positive effects of the critical role, these live plays? You can develop stories utilizing kind of the plot structure through screenwriting tools and stuff. So you can kind of follow a standard plot development. There's many different ones. With like a rising action, conclusion, all that stuff. You can structure your game in so many ways. You wrote Chekhov's gun everywhere. So the Chekhov's gun is don't show somebody the gun unless it's going to be used somewhere. So don't show somebody something unless you're going to use it somewhere. It doesn't make any sense to have dying trees keep appearing in your world unless you're going to make something of it. Okay.
Yeah. Don't introduce characters that don't have a purpose. Don't bring your players to places that, with fantastical designs and whatnot, unless there's a reason for it. This is part of, Critical Role is a very cinematic story. It's like we said, it's not very heavy on the mystery of the puzzles. It leans very much into style and screenwriting, coming up with plots, finding out, the hero's journey, all that stuff, and introducing parts of the story that make sense, focusing on them, building towards that. That's going to make your stories more cinematic. Yes. If that's what you want, if that's what your players want, this is how you do it.
Watch for slowdowns in your story as well. Like I said, you're going to have, if you aren't doing a highly produced game, you're going to have times when your players are going to spend hours doing nothing or accomplishing nothing or debating about how to solve a problem in front of them. Sometimes things are too hard for the players to get over, or sometimes the players need a little nudge of encouragement to go in the right direction. And since this is not a highly produced game, most likely that you're running, you can avoid slowdowns by, you can break the fourth wall. You can make puzzles a little bit easier to solve. You can make mysteries a little bit easier to solve. You can make sure that the threads are wrapped up real well to be able to solve them. If you mentioned about introducing new mechanics into the games, repetition is how you make that and reinforce it into a game. So, that's all things.
Whenever I introduce, you've got you want your players to do a thing, and it is a specific thing that's going to be, it's like a new mechanic in your game, or it's a new device or a new thing. Instead of making your players figure it out, if you want to speed things up, you show somebody else doing it. And then you have somebody help your players do it before they're required to do it. And that way it's built into that knowledge of how things work. We talked about, my Dinosaur Island thing. I had fights that were specifically designed to teach them how to win the final fight. And you build it up. You introduce ideas, and then you repeat them, and then you show them the alternates, and so that they can anticipate what's going to happen. And it makes for a more enjoyable experience for your players, because they will see something and immediately come to the conclusion of, this is how I'm supposed to do it, without having you as the GM having to tell them, go and do this thing. So,
and then you have characters to be more memorable and unique. You don't want people just to keep creating Fightor of the Fighter clan, who is a fighter and a champion of the pits.
Yeah, and voices are not personalities.
Yes.
They are not. Personalities are things that are like interesting about a character. Once again, foibles and follies, quirks and memorable moments,
The
interests.
aspects in the character, like the flaws, their personality traits, those help you role play and create a better character overall too. And if your players lean into them, they make for more memorable characters overall.
And one other thing about creating memorable characters, I know it's dumb in the sense of uh, it's not interesting as a character, but it is something your players might pick up on, is make them memorable also in appearance, describe them in a certain way, and then reinforce that when that character returns, because it makes the character like more solid in a player's mind. And they do that in Critical Role. You can see that in returning characters. There is a wizard that shows up in campaign 1 and then again in campaign 2. And when it's described in campaign 2, all the characters are like, wait, is it? And then it turns out it is, because they're expecting it. And that's the sort of thing that makes it memorable and makes your players happy.
And then finally, get your players to do more of the work here. We keep talking about descriptive role playing. We talked about this in the XP episode. You maybe can reward players for being more descriptive. Require the players to do something with their backstory. I disagree with that, Josh. I don't really care for the backstory whatsoever.
I'm just saying, if they want to have a game where they're it's more play based, it's more cinematic and hero moments and whatnot. You can't have a hero moment if your guy is Thog the Barbarian, who's a min-maxed, doesn't care about anything. His parents are both alive and they're doing very well. Thank you very much.
His hero moment is just being an Adonis everywhere he goes. Okay. So
yeah, he was doing that at age 5. Okay. That's not anything new for this character. No, they need to have weaknesses, a troubled history, maybe some embarrassment that is, befallen upon them and has forced them out of their clan.
Again, all those things are only useful if the players act upon them within the story. I don't care about them otherwise. Yeah.
Well, and that's the whole point. These things only matter if they're going to be included in the story. If this is the story you're telling, if this is the style that you want, if this is what your players want, then you can do this. If your players just want to come and roll dice and kill goblins, none of this matters.
Oh yeah, if it creates no motivation for your players, then it's just, you might as well not have it in your backstory. It might as well be like, this event happened to me, but it means nothing to me now. Okay,
this is another aspect of Chekhov's gun. If you have a troubled history with terrible things that have happened in your background and it never comes up, don't even introduce it.
Yep, exactly. And then your players should have a goal for their character. I think that all players should eventually build a goal for their character. You don't need to start with one, but you should eventually. You want your players to eventually figure out what they want to do with the character. And I don't care if that is, I want to get my character leveled up in such a way that it becomes this type of mage, or like whatever it might be. That is a goal. It's more of a player goal for their character. But any goal is worthwhile. But your players sort of need to develop one as it goes on.
Yeah. When you're creating D&D characters, there's a spot for what your roles and your motivations and your connections and stuff like that. And those things are useful if you're role playing. Those things are useful if you're creating a character that has depth and is interacting with the story in that direction. And you should encourage that for players that want to do that if your story is about that. They should think about, what is the character? What do they like? Because that can create a motivation for a goal.
Well said.
And then you can sit them down and ask them where they want to be in 5 years.
Well, anyways, that's just a little bit about the critical role in the room. Yeah. Again, I always say take them with a grain of salt because they've got the benefits and they've got serious detriments as well. I think to a lot of groups. So you know, enjoy them for what they are, and don't try to compare yourself to what you're doing. Because if you're telling a game for a group of players, and the players are enjoying it, then that's really all that matters. You don't need to be more like a heavily produced live play podcast. What are your thoughts, Josh? Any last final thoughts?
How do you want to do this? No. That's the only other thing I want to bring up is that, and I've seen this, and I may have done it myself once or twice, is that the in jokes from these live plays should stay in the live plays. Yes. Because your group will have their own. Matt Mercer has a catchphrase when anybody kills something, he asks them, how do you want to do this? Because he wants them to tell a cinematic way that they're going to be performing a violent murder, and as if glorifying violence here. But if your players are into that, if your players are into into that cinematic, come up with your own thing, or like explain to them what's going to happen. You might even give them a couple, like, I'm just going to do the boat. Like, then storytell it for them. Give them a little bit of flourish, but keep the critical role-isms in Critical Role.
Exactly. Yes. Well said. So if you have any thoughts on Critical Role, other live plays, your thoughts on the produced nature, how they affect the gameplay, or how they've improved your gameplay, let us know. Levelupyourgamingpodcast at gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. Also, the podcast is on YouTube, so smash the like button there, subscribe there. Otherwise, subscribe on your favorite podcast site, review the podcast, recommend it to a friend, all those good things. And that's going to wrap us up for the week. So for Josh, I'm Aaron. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye.